I think we're going to get underway here and let people arrive as they arrive. I want to welcome everybody to this forum on U.S.-Israeli relations, sponsored by the Project for the Study of the 21st Century. Real briefly, I'm Warren Stroble. I'm a diplomatic correspondent for Reuters, and I've had the pain and pleasure of following U.S.-Israeli relations for about 25 years. I was in the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing room in, I believe it was 1991, when Secretary of State James Baker, upon hearing that the newly formed right-wing Israeli government was raising questions about his peace plan, said that the Israeli and Palestinians can go call 456-1414, which was the White House switchboard, if they wanted to get serious about peace. That caused a huge blow up. I was also on the South Lawn of the White House when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands and signed the Oslo Accords. And sadly, I was with President Clinton some months later when he flew to Jerusalem for Rabin's funeral. So the one thing I want to say about myself, I'm here as my personal capacity and not speaking for Reuters. My bosses insist that I say that. But really my goal here is to kind of just move the discussion along, and I want to introduce our panelists and thank them very much for taking the time to be here for, I think, a really interesting discussion. Alexandria Paolozzi, got it right, okay, is the Senate Legislative Director and Issue Specialist on Israel for Concerned Women of America. She visited Israel in September 2014 on a Millennial Leaders tour. She's a graduate of Liberty University with a degree in public policy and a certificate in paralegal studies. And she's organized Capitol Hill panels on religious freedom in the Middle East, rallies and demonstrations in support of Israel, and has lobbied on pro-Israel policies in the U.S. Senate, which I would imagine makes you pretty busy right now, given the Senate is ground zero for the Iran nuclear deal. Guy Ziv is an assistant professor at American University School of International Service, where he teaches courses on U.S. foreign policy, the Middle East, and international negotiations. He's the author of Why Hawks Become Doves, Shimon Peres and Foreign Policy Change in Israel, which was recently published by the Sunni Press. He's founder and director of the Israel National Security Project, a repository of statements by Israeli security experts concerning the strategic imperative of the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And his current research focuses on foreign policy, decision-making, and the influence of think tanks, I guess like this one, in U.S. foreign policy. And finally, Ari Ratner is a return guest to PS21 events. He served in the U.S. State Department as, I believe, a special advisor to the Undersecretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, among other things. He's now with the New America Foundation and is writing a book on reforming bureaucracy for a new generation based on the experiences of young people in the Obama administration, which I'm looking forward to reading. Being not a young person anymore. And it's great, as always, with these events to have such a youthful audience. It should, as I said, make for an interesting discussion.
Should I leave now?
Yeah. Nope, I should leave now. I'm going to make two quick program notes and then get right to it. First of all, I hate personally going to events where the moderator speaks for 20 minutes, engages in a dialogue with the panelists for 30 minutes and says, oh, we have time for 2 questions. So we're going to try and maybe keep it to 30, 40 minutes and then have the balance of the time for a question and dialogue. And secondly, I know from bitter experience writing and talking about this particular subject, it can cause emotions very quickly, and I'm just asking our panelists, and especially people asking questions, to keep it civil, keep it fact-based. Let's have a really balanced discussion. What is a hot topic right now? And the topic at hand, of course, is really the U.S.-Iran nuclear agreement. Excuse me, the P5+1 Iran nuclear agreement that was reached in July. That is facing a life or death decision in the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives between now and mid-September. And the grave stress and strain, the differences over that agreement have put on the U.S.-Israeli relationship. And I guess the question I want to open up for panelists is, Dennis Ross, who's probably the dean of, certainly knows as much about this relationship as anybody. He's coming out with a book in October about the history of U.S.-Israeli relations. And he points out that there have been many, many times in the past where there have been severe disagreements. There was, I believe, the 1973 war. There was peace process disputes that I talked about under George Bush, the father administration. There was a decision by the United States to sell AWACS aircraft to Saudi Arabia in the mid to late 80s. I forgot the exact date, which caused tensions with Israel. There have been tensions over settlements, policy, and other things. And I guess for all of you guys, let's start with you if you could. Is this just one more bump in the road between two allies who are going to get over it, or is this something new that portends, if not a complete breach, obviously not that, but some sort of distancing in the weeks, in the months and years ahead?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here and for organizing this event. I'm sure it'll be a great discussion. As you point out, there have been incident after incident in the past. There have been other crises in U.S.-Israel relations, and the two countries, the two stalwart allies, have weathered these crises. And I think that this one is also going to feather over eventually, and the U.S.-Israel relationship will be restored. But this is not just any ordinary bump. I can't recall a time where the relations have been this poor. And that includes the incidents, the events that you mentioned, and others that you didn't mention, such as Ford's reassessment and other bumps in the road, so to speak. Because what makes this different than the other crises is the interference in partisan politics, in domestic politics. You had, for example, Netanyahu repeatedly, Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeatedly intervened in domestic American politics. And we saw this in 2012 when he invited Romney to Israel, undermining President Obama when he ran for re-election, all but endorsed Mitt Romney. And we saw this most recently in March when Netanyahu accepted an invitation by Speaker Boehner to talk about the Iran nuclear program, an invitation that he should not have accepted just weeks before the Israeli elections and weeks and a couple of months before the Iranian nuclear deal. This is something that I think undermines the foundations of the U.S.-Israel relationship, because this relationship is based on bipartisanship. And from President Truman on to today, we've seen Republicans and Democrats strongly supporting the state of Israel. And what Netanyahu has done is insert the partisanship that we see here in Washington into the debate. And this is something that I think will cost Israel in the immediate term, but possibly even in the long run, in the years ahead. The kind of bipartisan support that they've been used to getting, accustomed to getting.
Really quickly, how would that play out, do you think?
Well, it's unclear. It's unclear what the implications are going to be. But we already see Democrats being very uncomfortable with the notion that you have a foreign leader who is inserting his ideas and lobbying, in this case, the American Jewish community and members of Congress to undermine what President Obama sees as his signature foreign policy achievement.
Alexandria, how do you see it?
Thank you for having me, first of all. I come from a big Italian family, and I have heard the U.S.-Israeli relationship depicted as a family unit. And I think that shows true, especially with this case where family members disagree and they're loud and public about it, and they have a lot to say. But in the end, I think the relationship transcends party lines, and I feel that its essence is shown through our Judeo-Christian beliefs in America, and the people are the ones that really hold the relationship. The Americans and Israelis, can unite together for freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and that's something that's unique to both of us, especially when it comes to the Middle East. And so, just like a family, they're going to disagree and they're going to have their differences, but right now we're seeing the administration in the U.S. and Netanyahu maybe go back and forth about the differences of where they think this deal lines, but when you get down into the details and the political figures too underneath them, they differ as well. And so it's like you're saying, they're bipartisan, and I feel like it is a very bipartisan issue for everyone, is support for Israel. And it's something that the American people can unite together for, and so can the Israeli people.
Thank you. Well, it certainly seems that, it's obvious, but maybe we should restate it, that the U.S. and Israel do have values, as you mentioned, that they share: democracy, and religious values as well, and also just frankly interests, including fighting Islamic State, including pushing back on Iran's role in the region, many others that I could mention. So that would seem to indicate there's some substance to the relationship that will continue no matter how. On the other hand, I have heard, getting to Guy's point, somebody yesterday mentioned that he thought Netanyahu was acting like the U.S. Senator from West Jerusalem and involving himself too much in American politics. Ari, you were in Israel, you said in June?
Yeah.
What did you hear, and what do you think about the potential damage or lack thereof? Not just right now, but I mean,
yeah.
understanding.
Look, I say this with no great joy and to be descriptive, not to be cheering. My mother's Israeli. I have a deep affection for Israel, the country. I have close ties to it personally. There's a bit of a parlor game. You know, for a while, when I served in the State Department, we were saying this is the worst moment in U.S.-Israel relations. Did the Baker thing, or you know, Begin and Reagan arguing about Lebanon. You would go all the way back to, you know, Eisenhower and the Sinai campaign. And I think now the reality is this is, period, the worst moment in U.S.-Israeli relations. And I think the damage is deep and potentially very long-lasting. The bedrock of the foundation, which terrible things. Alexandria, as Alexandria was saying, is absolutely right. It's a relationship, you know, in the classic telling of it based on shared interests and shared values, as the American administration would say. By the way, notice the difference between what Obama said when he went to the Cairo speech, which is he wanted to build a relationship with the Muslim world based on mutual interest and mutual respect, which is quite a bit beneath shared interest and shared values. And you could add to it shared history, common ties, memory of the Holocaust. There's many, many things. I think the reality is, and I would say this, the Israelis classically operated through Congress. You know, the bedrock of the relationship was the Hill more than anything else. So if you look at other allies we have in the region, Saudi Arabia, the Jordanians a little different. Saudi Arabians always had a good relationship with the White House. The Hill hates them. The Israelis fundamentally had the relationship with Congress because that was reflective of American public opinion ultimately. And if you look at American public opinion now, the partisan divide on Israel is very deep and is very real. Israel now looks like most partisan issues in American politics: gay marriage, maybe some other partisan issues, gay marriage, use of force internationally, you know, belief in religiosity, healthcare. The constituency for Israel is now older, whiter, more rural, more religious, obviously more Republican. The constituency for, I wouldn't say against Israel, it's too strong, but the constituency that's more skeptical of Israeli intentions, that believes Israel, you know, the most extreme level is an oppressor, at the least extreme level, the current government of Israel is not interested in peace, or, you know, however you want to phrase it, is younger, more female, more minority, more urban. In other words, the exact same coalition that put Barack Obama in office, and will likely, I mean, I say this as a Democrat, but will probably, I mean, the Democrats have now won 5 to 6 presidential elections in a row, at least in popular vote, will likely, at least not in Congress, it's different, but it will likely, I think, is the zeitgeist of the next generation. So this is now a huge generational divide. There's all sorts of exceptions to this rule. And I would say this, even within the American Jewish community, the damage is pretty deep. I don't want to exaggerate it. I think the reality is, you know, the relationship will always function on a level. Even now, the defense cooperation is very strong. You know, we're not going to throw Israel under a bus, so to speak, which is, you know, Israel's not Czechoslovakia of 1938 and, you know, whatever else you want to say. But the reality is, I think it's a serious problem. By the way, a problem I would say that extends past what Netanyahu has done. This is a problem I think reflective of trends trends fundamentally in the American body politic and in the Israeli body politic and how they interplay with each other. But it's one that has been deeply exacerbated to some extent by Obama, but deeply by Netanyahu, with serious implications. You know, and we can talk about what it means in a practical level, but, you know, I mean, Congressional Black Caucus, which had nothing against Israel and anything, gone for quite a while. Young Democrats, when you go talk to Hill staffers, you're probably more experienced than I do. The Hill staffers, who are the foreign policy liaisons on the Democratic side, much more skeptical of Israel. You know, these are the younger Democratic members, much more skeptical of Israel. I think it's a serious crisis. And I say this again with sadness, something that Israel will suffer from much more than America, because while it's, I agree, a relationship of shared interests and shared values, fundamentally it's an unequal partnership, and it's one that benefits Israel more than anyone. It's a fundamental basis for Israel's survival, one of the strongest bases for Israel's survival, and Israel stands to lose more in the damaging of it.
That's a really sobering analysis.
I decided to go dark, or honest.
You know, personally, I don't have a professional stake in which way the Senate goes on the Iran nuclear deal, but I was somewhat depressed that Jeff Flake, a Republican who thought he might come out for it, decided not to, which means there's going to be a partisan vote. Every Republican will vote against it in the Senate, probably in the House. And now it's just a matter of how many Democrats will affect or not. So, yeah, that's a partisan. One of the things that I've struggled with, and I'd like panelists to address is, and as you mentioned, Ari, Obama, at least at one level, has been extremely supportive of Israel. If you take the administration at their own word, they've done more in terms of helping Israel's security and providing intelligence and providing funding for the Iron Dome anti-missile system and on and on and on. They have not been slaggards in that regard, and yet there seems to be a view among certainly many Israelis and certainly the Israeli government that Obama does not have Israel's best interests at heart. So there's a disconnect there, and I wonder, is that distrust in Israel? Is it personal animosity between Bibi and Barack? And does Obama have a tin ear for what's going on in Israel? Alexandria, do you mind starting?
Sure. I think the details in the Iran deal can show people's hesitancy to view Obama favorably when you're talking about Israel. So one of the things that I think stuck out most is the $150 billion that Iran seeks to get immediately once this deal goes into implementation. And with that, you know, Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism, and they train terrorists and they fund them and they provide them arms. And who do they turn around and use those against? It's Israel. Hamas and Hezbollah are the ones that reap the benefits from funds going to Iran. And Israel understands that. I know I went to Israel last September. It was not even a few days after the last attack from Gaza into Israel, and everyone was just very aware of what was going on and very attentive to the threat that faces them at all of their borders. And so I think the details within the deal makes Israelis who are already heightened when it comes to security more nervous because of the influx in money that Iran's going to be getting, and the verification system that's extremely weak. And as Senator Gillibrand said when she came out in support of the deal, it's imperfect. Imperfect leaves a huge hole for negative repercussions. And no one is turning a blind eye to that. They can see that. And so it feeds into the atmosphere of just doubt with what the administration is doing. And let's face it, we're dealing with a climate that is very split. There's two different sides and a lot of different issues with Congress and with what the administration is doing. And so when you're talking about the security of a nation, Israel senses that, and they're going to sense it even more with the details that are in the deal.
Yeah, I think even the senators who have come out in favor of the deal, and some former Israeli officials who have come out in favor of the deal, members of Shin Bet, or leaders of Shin Bet, or the Mossad, or they do so sort of reluctantly, I think. They say this is the best option for Israel right now, but it's an imperfect deal.
Well, and I think too, they're shielding themselves for what could happen. They're public figures, they're going to be around for a while, and saying that something is imperfect shows that there are flaws, and shows that it's not something that is resolute, and it's not something that we can put everything behind. So they're hesitant, and they're going in with hesitancy, and I think that's shown with what's going on in the Middle East. This is a deal that not everyone is backing with their full support, and we have 10 Democrats that we know are undecided, and there's 2 weeks before they're going to be likely voting on a resolution of disapproval. So that says a lot, especially in the current climate that we're dealing with in the Senate.
Thank you. guy, can we assign blame to Bibi, to Barack for the state relations? Why does President Obama seem to have done so much yet to get
Yeah,
little
so
credit?
he has done quite a bit, and on paper, he's done more than any other president in terms of providing the kind of military and defense support to Israel, more so than any other president. He's provided arms, he's provided funds, military funds, more Iron Dome support, more Aero Project support than any other president, as well as other systems. What is lacking here is the emotional connection, and this is something that I think Obama perhaps has underestimated, and perhaps the people surrounding Obama have underestimated. Israelis need a bear hug, and Obama is not a hugger. And I think that's I don't want to simplify the problem and make it cutesy, but I do think that there is an emotional disconnect that the president has with the Israeli public. And prime example of that was his decision not to visit Israel immediately after his Cairo address when he first became president.
He didn't visit at all in his first term.
He did not visit Israel in the first term. He waited until the second term, and this was perhaps a big mistake on his part, and kind of really reaffirmed the Netanyahu narrative. Coupled with that, you have the bad blood between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu, which began from day one. So I don't think you can disassociate yourself from that. And that's the reason that Israelis have not responded favorably. They don't trust Obama, and many Israelis are unaware of the extent to which the administration has been supportive of Israel. By the way, not only in terms of defense and security, also diplomatic support. President Obama has consistently vetoed any and all anti-Israel resolutions in the United Nations. He fought President Mahmoud Abbas, he fought Abbas' attempts to declare Palestinian state at the United Nations. So Obama has been consistently a friend of Israel, indeed.
But he doesn't do the bear hug thing with Israelis.
That's right.
All right.
I agree with everything Guy just said, and I would say it's deeper on a level, even though we can argue about the specifics. Look, if you look at who Barack Obama is and how he rose, the worldview is, I don't want to say fundamentally at odds with Israel, because Israel has many sides of it, but it comes from a very particular time. One of the reasons Barack Obama is president is because we went to war with Iraq. Barack Obama gave a great speech in 2012 saying not against all wars, but against dumb wars. He has a skepticism of unilateral use of force. The Bush administration went to war in Iraq. Barack Obama was president. There's a lot more that happened there, but he has a deep and understandable commitment to multilateralism, commitment to use of force as a last resort, which I think if you look at the dominant Israeli narrative, Israel has and I think understandably, given Israel's both their security situation and their history, a reluctance to accept multilateralism, which hasn't always worked out well from the Israeli perspective, a reluctance for things that intervene on Israeli sovereignty or Israeli ability to even strike first if needed. And there's all sorts of things that have contributed. Fundamentally, Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu and the coalition they represent view the world very differently. They are from the left and from the right, is another way of putting it. One's a little more from Mars and one's a little more from Venus. We used to say about the Americans and the Europeans. Look, lots of things then get fed into a narrative, most of which, trying to think of an artful time, Joe Biden say, most of which are malarkey, or if they're not malarkey, they become much more than that. So look, Barack Obama went to Cairo and he didn't go to Israel. Was it a big deal? Sure. Where did he go? Anyone know where he went immediately after he went to Cairo?
Did he go to Turkey?
He went to Bergen-Belsen. So Barack Obama went to the heart of the Arab capital, the heart of the Arab world, the largest state in the Arab world, the largest city in the Arab world, where lots of things he said from the Israeli narrative weren't right. Okay, he credited Israeli. By the way, one of the problems is Barack Obama was surrounded by American Jews who are different than Israelis and have a different narrative of why Israel exists to some degree. The Holocaust features more in the American Jewish narrative than the Israeli narrative. The Israeli narrative, the state comes out of settling the land from 1882 at least, and because 2,000 years ago, for American Jews, the Holocaust plays a huge role in Israel, of course, too, but for American Jews, it's a little more resonant. Barack Obama went to the heart of the Arab world, told them not to deny the Holocaust anymore, and his very next day went to Bergen-Belsen. Okay, this isn't a minor thing, right? And the Israelis, I think to some degree, understandably, took it as an insult that he didn't come to Israel, but it's not like he went somewhere crazy next. He went to Bergen-Belsen. Now, he also went to Israel as his first visit the second term. I think there is some truth in the Israeli narrative that Obama, distance itself is strong, but look, Obama saw the world on the level of the U.S. had a giant divide at the end of the Bush administration with the Muslim world, which is more than to the extent as it's a cognizant political entity is more than 1 billion people, and that there had to be a rapprochement to that. He wasn't trying to throw Israel under the bus to that, but he went for a particular purpose, most of which had nothing to do with Israel. And I think it feeds into some deep things, but a lot of it is exacerbated, and a lot of it is exacerbated by the leaders and the media and panels.
One of the things, I'm sorry,
I was just going to add one point, because I think you made a good point. I don't know if the issue here is as much the multilateralism of Obama versus the unilateralism of Netanyahu. I think a lot of Israelis simply see Obama as retreating from the U.S. role in the Middle East, the U.S. role in the world, and they're afraid of what that means and what the implications are of the void that is being created in the absence of U.S. leadership.
Oh, look, I agree, and I think a lot of these are symbolic of, multilateralism is a policy thing. Most people don't resonate that. It's just leadership styles. Netanyahu is a leader who, and Israeli body politics very much respects his values, strength. The classic Israeli term of an iron wall, right? You can't let things go unchallenged. You live in as Barack called it, you live in the villa in the midst of the jungle. You have to be strong. Barack Obama also likes strong, but Barack Obama is a professor, right? He's a law school professor. He's got a much more horizontal millennial leadership style. And by the way, it's not just the Israelis that have a problem with this. Most American allies, when you go to the Gulf, they worry about the U.S. leadership, and this has been exacerbated by what happened in Syria. When you go to East Asia, most of the world's population was happy that Barack Obama was elected president. The Europeans were also happy. A lot of the third world was happy. Any frontline American ally, so the Koreans, the Israelis, the Poles, the Georgians, viewed Obama with skepticism because they viewed themselves under threat and they wanted a stronger American presence. The Israelis are just louder about it.
I want to pick up on that. I mean, one thing that's going on in the background here, I think, I don't know if we need to delve into the details tonight, but it's a changing Middle East. Right? You do have the sense among the Gulf leaders, Israel, perhaps others, that the U.S. traditional role in the Middle East is receding. That may or may not be true, but in perception is part of reality, right? You have that. You have the Obama administration's decision to sort of back away from Hosni Mubarak some years ago, which resonates. I think it certainly still resonates with Gulf countries of Saudi Arabia about like how, when we're in trouble, are you going to be there for us? And then you have what could be a U.S. rapprochement with Iran, frankly, over the coming years. I think the very fact that the U.S. is talking to Iran, set aside the details of the deal, the very fact that there's now some kind of sustained U.S.-Iranian diplomacy unnerves the Israelis, no matter what the outcome of that diplomacy is. And I know it unnerves the Saudis as well. Somebody once told me that Saudi Arabia would rather see Iran with a nuclear weapon contained than Iran without a nuclear weapon that's not contained. In other words, they want Iran in the box. So that's, that this is sort of playing in the background of the U.S.-Israeli relations we're talking about. There's one last thing I'd just like to mention. Has anybody else in this room been to Iran other than me? Okay. Maybe this will resonate.
Before you were born.
I don't know about that. I've been to Iran twice. I've been to virtually every major Arab country. A few members of the Arab League I haven't been to. I spent significant time in Israel, including 2002 during the Second Intifada. And most pro-Israel, pro-American country in the Middle East on a popular level is Iran. Israel's up there, but Iran, the people in Iran love this country. Everybody has a brother or sister, uncle. Pro-American. Iran is the most pro-American country in the Middle East, I think, at a popular level, which is kind of shocking to people. But they, and there is, I think, over time potential. The regime is what it is, and probably not going to change overnight. But there is potential. Both the U.S. and Israel were allies with Iran during the time of the Shah. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. I'm going to ask one last question and turn it over to the audience. And this is kind of a two-list question. And Ari, I want to start with you since you touched on it in some of your remarks. There are some polls, and polls can be tricky things, that show American Jews are actually in favor of this Iran nuclear agreement, at least the plurality. There was one poll that was done showing 48% of American Jews favor the agreement, even with a lot of reservations, 28% didn't. And again, polls can be dangerous things, but it kind of raises the question, Do the major American Jewish groups, does the Netanyahu government accurately reflect how American Jews feel about this? If we could even.
No, I mean, what Peter Beinart said in his article, whatever, 7 years ago about the American Jewish leadership, I forget what it was called. American Jewish leadership is out of touch with average Jews. When he said it was controversial, and now is controversial but undisputed, I think, by the evidence. Look, the majority of Jews are Democratic, 70% something. Look, there's a lot of fractures in the American Jewish community. There's a generational fracture. Younger people are more skeptical of Israel, older people are more supportive. There's a religious factor. The biggest area of growth, more pronounced in Israel, but also in America, is the Orthodox community. And then you have a lot of people who are leaving the religion via intermarriage or via, just secularization, as you have in many American religious streams. And the old kind of conservative main line of American Judaism is kind of withering to some extent. So, look, the younger and the more secular, as on almost everything else, are a little less religious, a little less hawkish on Israel, a little less, a little more democratic. The more religious and the older, which are a smaller percentage of the community, are deeply skeptical of the deal. And I think most people, I can certainly speak for myself, the deal is not a perfect deal. I mean, I'm not sure there is such a thing. And the reality is, everyone says the deal is not a perfect deal because it's true and there's political posturing and all that, but it's not the greatest deal. Could the Americans have gotten a better deal? Potentially. But the reality is no one in America, or very, very few people, want to go with a war with Iran. The Iranians aren't stupid. They know that. So we're negotiating from a weak position. Could we have gotten a better deal? Probably. Would it fundamentally change the dynamic? Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, so the poll that you're referring to, which was published in the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles, showed that 49% of American Jews supported the agreement, and a much smaller percentage, which I don't have with me, opposed it. But of those who said they knew enough about the deal to offer an opinion, 63% of Jews supported it. There's clearly a disconnect between American Jews and the organizations that claim to represent them. Because we've seen in the last couple of weeks, one Jewish organization after another, with a few exceptions, like J Street and Americans for Peace Now and Jewish Voice for Peace. There are several exceptions, but the majority of them have expressed skepticism, if not all, downright opposition to the agreement, and that's not where the American Jewish community is.
Can I just add one thing real quick, which is, let's stop kidding ourselves. The agreement is going to go through. This isn't the greatest, piece of news in history. Just, you can do the math. Doesn't, all those Democratic senators aren't going to vote against it on veto. They're going to vote against it the first time. Barack Obama is going to veto it. The agreement is going to pass. The Israelis are taking huge cost for no benefit at all.
If I may just interject really quickly. So,
good transition.
To your point, I would say that, first of all, Iran supporting the U.S., that's shocking because we really don't see that at all. What we see, right, but I'm saying, like, what we see, especially as millennials, is the tweets from the Ayatollah with pictures of a gun being to Obama's head and saying "Death to America," and Iranians in the streets chanting "Death to America" and burning our flags. And then the Jewish community may not agree with the deal, or they might agree with the deal. But also what we see too is thousands in New York City opposing the deal and pushing Schumer to oppose it. And out of all the senators in the Senate currently, I would say Senator Schumer is one that speaks with great authority on just having an Israeli Jewish community behind him. And he opposes the deal. He just came out, and earlier, even on Capitol Hill during a hearing before he came out, he said that the implications are profound and far-reaching. And I think that really shows this is something that Republicans all disagree with. Democrats are having a very hard time getting behind the deal, and there's a reason for that. And yes, it might go through, it's going to go through with the 60. We don't have enough to sustain a veto of 67, but it's going to be close. And that's something that this administration has not seen yet. It's something that many administrations don't see. the closeness and the not fear, but it really is resonating with something that is different and hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't happen all the time. And I mean, really, the Senate has been lock in step to the administration and in a lot of things. And so what we see with the deal is that this is something that Democrats have to break away from them on, and it doesn't make it easy for them to do. And so with senators like Senator Schumer and Menendez coming out and saying that they oppose the deal, and 10 being up in the air, that says a lot.
So do you agree with Ari that it's going to be virtually impossible to override the veto? Or
I wouldn't say
it's
not going to be impossible. I think it's going to be extremely close. I think it's going to come down to 5 to 3 votes, and what it's going to come down to is pressure from the American people on their senators, on their elected officials, and that's what I do. I'm part of people that work with grassroots and activate people, and that's something that's unique to American government that a lot of people don't see outside of the U.S. is the influence that the American people have on their elected officials when they actually are engaged. There are low-informed voters who don't pay attention or only pay attention when it specifically addresses them, but this is an issue that a lot of people are waking up for and paying attention to and advocating against.
Can I just respond to that real quick? Which is, look, I agree. The American public has an important role to play. Let's be clear. Just we're getting out of opinions. If America were to reject this deal, which I think the chances of doing are extremely minimal, but they've done in the past. We rejected the League of Nations after World War I, with, by the way, disastrous consequences. This will be a disastrous blow, not just for America, but for Israel, on multiple levels. On the level that we have nothing, there is no alternative. It's just no one has a credible alternative. It doesn't exist. Who will be seen, rightly or wrongly, as one of the prime architects of the collapse of this deal? The Israelis. I would hesitate to add, and I say this as a Jew, among some public opinion, the Jews, which I don't think is, the classic Israeli, the classic Jewish thing that's good for the Jews. But forget that. I'm not worried about, the strength of the Jews in reality. The reality is, it's going to be passed. The reality is, it should be passed, and everyone knows it. And I agree. Call your senator if you support the deal, and call your senator, by the way, if you don't. But the senators aren't so responsible. By the way, there's the House too has to overrun it. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I have to agree with Ari on this, because the math is simply not on the opponent's side. Even if they manage to pass this resolution, which they very well might do, there's just no way they're going to be able to override. They're not going to have the numbers to override President Obama's promised veto. Moreover, I would argue that even Schumer, who, as you pointed out, announced recently that he's going to oppose the deal, is not whipping up votes, in favor of the Republican resolution. So if he felt this strongly about it, why would he have announced it so late? Why would he have announced it during
Trump debate?
During the debate, during the most highly watched, presidential primary debate in history? And why would he not be whipping up, votes for it? And why is he being so quiet? This is very uncharacteristic of Schumer. So I think this was a politically calculated vote on his end, and not a vote on principle. But really, more importantly, at least as far as I'm concerned, is not what Schumer says or Menendez or what the average Joe has to say on this. It's what security experts have to say on this. And we've seen now a statement made by 75 international nuclear arms control experts, including Gary Seymour, who headed the United Against Nuclear Iran group that he recently left. Strong critics of Iran, skeptics of the Ayatollah and his intentions, who come out in support of this deal. Moreover, the Israelis who have spoken out in favor of the deal are largely members of the security establishment. We've seen former members of the former senior commanders of the IDF, former heads of the Shin Bet, former heads of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agencies, and sitting politicians on the center left who have a military background, who have come out in support of the deal. And to me, that at least for me, that resonates more than whatever Schumer has to say on this topic.
Yeah, I agree. Military personnel, in their opinion, I think should be weighed very strongly. And there's a group that actually came out with Iraq war vets, and a lot of them who were harmed in Iraq, saying that they oppose the deal and saying that if Iran gets this influx of $150 billion, what more damage they can do in the Middle East and how they could hurt America and American citizens. And there's a poll that shows from Secure America Now, 77% polled said that if we don't stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon now, our children will have to deal with it in the future and deal with the threat of a nuclear Iran. And then that same poll shows that 75% agree that if Iran did have a nuclear weapon, they would use it against Israel. And so I think that it's
These
very
are
telling.
Who is this?
Secure America Now is what the poll was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I think too,
It's a group
like,
that's among those fighting against the agreement.
I think it just goes to show that this is something that, there's Iraq war veterans out there that have been harmed and they've served our country and they feel very strongly about this too.
That's a good point. Thank you.
And I think we're all in agreement that an Iranian nuclear bomb is a bad thing and should be prevented. I think the question is whether this deal does that or not. And I believe that this deal is, is a good deal. It's not a perfect. Well, by the way, we keep saying it's not a perfect deal. I don't know a single deal out there, a single agreement, a single treaty that's perfect.
Right, but Congress has in the past taken executive agreements and tweaked them or added to them. And I would say that I think that's not even an option right now. And we need to be looking at alternative ways to get to where we need to or look at the end goal. This shouldn't be the end all be all.
No,
So
but they don't exist.
So that's the question. What is the alternative?
Yeah.
What is the better agreement or the better alternative?
And it's interesting to me how both the opponents and detractors describe this thing in just completely stark terms. It's either going to pave the pathway to a bomb or it's the only way to stop Iran getting involved. This is the sort of middle in between.
Well, I think it delays significantly the pathway to a bomb. I'm under no delusion that the Iranians would like to, build a bomb. But what this deal does is it postpones that for at least 10 to 15 years, which is very significant. And more importantly, it also extends the breakout time. So currently, Iran has only 2 months, 2 months in which they can assemble a bomb. And as a result of this deal, they will have at least a year before that breakout time. That's pretty significant. So in the meantime, go ahead.
No, look, I was just going to say, no one is in dispute that Iran wants a bomb. No one should have any illusions that the government of Iran is a bad government. It's terrible to its people. It's terrible to American soldiers in Iraq. It's terrible to our hostages. We can go on and on and on about the terrible things the government of Iran has done. All of that is rhetoric, and none of that changes the reality. The reality is the agreement is not by any stretch a perfect agreement, and the Iranians very well might cheat on it. I think they probably will cheat on it. That still means we're better off with an agreement where at least the Iranians are responsible for backing away from it, and then we can do something about it with a longer time. The absolute worst case scenario is we've bought ourselves time for a sanctions regime that was going to collapse anyways. I agree with you, it's bad Iran's getting $150 billion. They were going to get it anyways. The East Asians want to do business with them, the Europeans want to do business with them. How many people in this country lining up to do business with them? They're a country of 80 million people. You can't lock them out of the international system forever. Their own people don't want to be locked out of the international system.
But the deals
I'm
are.
going to give you the last word. We're going to promise to turn it over to questions.
Okay. I think the details are very concerning, and one of them was just highlighted in the Hill today, stating that Iran will have the ability to check their own sites for verification of building weapons. And it's little things like that, the minute details that come out that show how bad this deal is. Yes, it's not perfect, but it could be a lot better than what it is. And we're not asking for 100%. It would just be good if it wasn't 20%.
Thank you. This is turning into a lively and I hope fruitful debate. I do want to keep my promise to get our audience and attendees involved right away. Before I do that, I just want to kind of clarify one thing I said about Iran being very pro-American. I was there in 2009 during the Green Revolution. I got kicked out after 10 days, but I saw the Basiji beating the hell out of students. I saw the people who were running against Ahmadinejad being put on their house arrest. I don't have any illusions about the nature of the regime. Certainly what they've done to American soldiers in Iran, blowing up the barracks in Lebanon, et cetera, is terrible. But I think if you look at it in terms of the educated elite, especially young people, they're really surprisingly on the street, not government people, they're surprisingly pro-American. Everybody has a cousin or a uncle in LA or in Palm Springs. They all want visas. They're all fascinated by America. They even told me that they think American products are better than Chinese products, whereas most people around the world don't think that. So I just wanted to clarify what I was saying. With that, let's open up to questions. Please, question, not statement.
Yeah, Ken Meyer, World Docs. A quick rejoinder to things three of you all said. First of all, you said no one doubts that Iran wants the bomb. I doubt it. Our intelligence agencies doubt it. The National Intelligence Estimate said they gave up their nuclear weapons program in 2003. You were there in 2009. Let's not forget that we spent $400 million to influence that election in Iran. You could create a lot of trouble with that. And the young lady, the notion that Iran would use a nuclear weapon on Israel is just absurd. First of all, it'd be suicidal. Secondly, there wouldn't be many Palestinians left. They wouldn't be able to visit the third holiest site of Islam for 10,000 years, probably. It's just ludicrous. Anyway, but a more general question, what is the basis of the hostility between Iran and Israel? I've got the answer, but
Anybody want to?
It's a fundamental difference. I think it's for ideology purposes. Iran supreme leader calls for death to Israel because of their beliefs, and they're the infidel.
I mean, it's a very complicated question. I think there's certainly a nature of it's an ideological regime that certainly at its core fundamentally disagrees with the notion that there should be a state called Israel. It's also used by them to support opposition in, gather public favor in parts of the Arab world and parts of the Islamic world. There's also, from their perspective, the Israelis are allies with the Shah, who didn't exactly treat them very well. So, there's a lot of reasons. By the way, they've cooperated in the past, too, during the Iran-Iraq war quietly. So, it's a complicated relationship.
I think it's fairly simple.
I don't think anything in life is fairly simple.
I would agree.
Well, I think it's based on our close relationship with Israel and the fact that we are a very serious threat to Iran. And that's, if Israel was neutral or something, there's no reason, well, not much of a reason why there should be hostility between the two countries. And as you point out, in the past there has been, even after the revolution.
The hostility is fundamentally not from the Israeli side on this.
Is what?
Fundamentally is not from the Israeli side on this.
Well, it is in the sense that it is America's close ally, and it talks about bombing Iran. It wouldn't dare do that if it didn't have us backing them up.
So just to clarify here, I don't think Israel has ever threatened to bomb Iranian people.
I don't think Iran has ever threatened to bomb Israel.
Iran has repeatedly threatened to destroy and eliminate the Jewish state. And
Oh,
I'm not just
come on!
talking about,
To say that Israel is a historical anomaly that is destined to disappear is not exactly calling for the destruction of the Jewish
There
state.
has
The Ayatollah just came out with a book called Palestine, where he lays out his plan to destroy Israel.
Which Ayatollah?
The Ayatollah Khomeini, the supreme leader of Iran right now.
Khomeini.
So other questions? Somebody must. Thank you.
I have a question about, we talked a little bit about the nature of the Iranian people, generally speaking, being relatively pro-US. And I do feel like sometimes we get caught up in talking about Israel as this sort of monolithic entity and Iran as a monolithic entity. And we often describe, Palestine through the terms of either Mahmoud Abbas or Hamas or Islamic Jihad. What do you think, amongst the, obviously this is a complex question, but amongst the Israeli population or factions of the Israeli population and the Iranian population, is there a sign of appreciation for each other. The same way that when you were in Iran, you saw people who appreciated America and the American economy and the American lifestyle. Are there people in Iran who appreciate Israel and vice versa in your personal experiences? Or
I don't know that I want to take this on, but I want to point, there was an article recently written by a Jewish journalist, I think to the Forward, who was allowed to go to Iran and talk to people on the street there, and they were pretty clear that, and he talked to many Iranian Jews, and they were pretty clear that they opposed Israel's policy, but they were not talking about destruction of Israel.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that Khamenei's statements shouldn't be taken seriously.
Right.
Yeah, so that's good. But, Gary?
The problem I have with this comparison is that I have no doubt at all that the Iranian people are more pro-American than your leaders make out. But I think that fundamentally it's irrelevant right now. And it's irrelevant to the deal, and it's irrelevant to U.S.-Iranian relations for the foreseeable future, because the Iranian people, unfortunately, don't have a say in their future. And this, I think, was one of the weaknesses of President Obama's address at my university, American University, last 2 weeks ago. He made the same point that you made, Warren, and that's it's simply not relevant at this point in time, unfortunately. So is there potential for improving U.S.-Iranian relations, or even Israeli-Iranian relations for that matter, in the future? Absolutely. But not as long as you have a regime that is dedicated to the destruction of Israel, a regime that is that's a destabilizing force throughout the Middle East, supports the wrong players all over the Middle East, and it's a regime that strongly suppresses its people, as opposed to Israel, which is a very vibrant, pluralistic, liberal democracy that might have a conservative government in power, but the media does not hesitate to tear their prime minister apart. And you have lots of different views. There's a big marketplace of ideas in Israel that you simply don't see elsewhere in the Middle East.
Can I say, look, I agree with a lot of what's being said, but I might overstate the case too, which is, look, fundamentally the Iranian regime is ideological, but I think your question is a very important one. And it's not monolithic. The people of Iran aren't monolithic. By the way, the American government isn't monolithic. I say this as someone who's worked in the American government. Systems are complicated. The Iranian regime responds, at least to some extent, to public opinion. Rouhani was allowed to run and is, to some extent, at a minimum, appearing to try and mollify large portions of the Iranian people who want a larger say in the world. I agree with you. Fundamentally, the choice is not theirs. It's not a democracy like America or Israel. They can't vote, and I mean, they actually do vote, but they can't vote by the open way. They had the Green Revolution, but the Iranian people have a say. It through fits and starts, and it works. I mean, to answer your question directly, you've seen a lot of social movements. There was, I can't remember, I think it was started by Israelis, but it might have been started by Iranians, where it was called Israel Loves Iran on Facebook and Iran Loves Israel, and they had many likes among each other. And I'm sure, yeah, it was a couple of years ago by now. And I'm sure, by the way, you could get an Israelis hate Iran, and and you'd have a bunch of people join it too. There's, I don't know the exact numbers, but tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 Israelis of Iranian descent, Israelis who grew up in Persia, or however you want to phrase it. Some of them, by the way, are the most anti-Iranian Israelis around. Some of them have good ties and still keep in touch with people. It's complicated. And of course, if you want to look at the long arc of Jewish history, which is quite long, you can often point to, Cyrus liberated the Jews from Babylonia, which I think has absolutely nothing to do with the Iranian nuclear deal. But if you're going to develop a narrative, it doesn't hurt. So.
Right.
Alexandria, anything you want to add?
I think they have more authority in that respect than I do, but I would agree with what I was saying, definitely.
Please.
I would just say at the beginning of this discussion, I was really, I guess you shouldn't be surprised in the city that it took a political bent, but to the bipartisan nature of the relationship between Israel and America, and hopefully we could all come together and talk about who our allies are and who our enemies are. And Israel's not monolithic. Anyone that's been there knows that. They are one of the only countries in the Middle East that has Muslims, Jews, and Christians living mostly peacefully amongst each other. That's encouraging. We're hopefully able to do the same. So we are similar in a lot of ways, we're different in a lot of ways. But my question for the panelists is regarding that bipartisan ideal. When I was in Israel last year, it's also very pro-America. Of course it is, because like some have said, they wouldn't be who they are and where they are without us. And they've relied on us for quite some time. I heard from a senior military official when I was in Israel that Barack Obama has given him more information than any former president has. And that's great. But how are the Jewish people in Israel, how is anyone in Israel, to see America split largely between two parties, which as we know, they have like 30. So it must be very nice for them to look over here and go, oh, it's easy to figure out. A Democratic Party that not only booed God at their last national convention, which I think offends all people of faith, Muslim, Christian, Jew, is talking to Iran, not only the greatest funder of terrorism for Israel, but the greatest funder of terrorism in our country, in other countries across the world. How are they supposed to align themselves? How does Bibi see that? And I'm just asking. I'm not an Israeli official. I am not an American official. But for the Jewish people and the people in Israel, what do you see the Democrat Party doing to align themselves that they will support Israel's right to exist, period? Just a right to exist.
You want to take on that hot potato?
Sure. I mean,
It's a softball.
look, I mean, the Democratic Party, no, I would hesitate to find certainly any respected leader in the Democratic Party. The question of Israel's right to exist in American politics is a far settled question. You have to be pretty extreme somewhere in American politics to say Israel doesn't have the right to exist. It's not a settled question in most of the world, but from American, we recognize Israel, 14 minutes after it declared independence in 1948. It's got a UN resolution. You know, we got an embassy in Tel Aviv that at some point will be moved to Jerusalem. You know, there's no debate in the Democratic Party or in the larger American body politic about Israel's right to exist. Settled question. There is a huge debate in the Democratic Party and a much bigger debate globally about all sorts of things like the peace process, tactics with regards to Iran, the type of things you were talking about, the role of church and state or a synagogue and state in the Israeli context. All the debates that exist in normal politics exist in Israel, you know, healthcare, all this kind of stuff. They, you know, and they're reflected in most politics. And certainly the security debates and the role of identity are heightened in Israel. And to some extent, they're heightened in America. I would say, I wrote a piece on this, but I would say, look, to some extent, Israel and America have been very traumatized by the last 15 years, but differently traumatized. So America has experienced now, you know, multiple crises. 9/11, the Iraq War was a crisis for many people. The financial crisis and its aftermath has been a crisis. And it's a crisis that polarized the American electorate across many different levels. Israel has experienced a second intifada, the war with Lebanon, 3 wars with Gaza. It's also polarized Israel, but we've shifted more to the left. I think this is just factual. I happen to be of the left, but I think it's true, especially younger people shifted more to the left, and in Israel, people have shifted more to the right.
But doesn't that kind of reflect maybe the reality of what they see happening in our country? So if Israeli population, like you said, is going more towards the right, then what does that say about what they need right now as a country?
I mean, look, Israel moves to the right not because what they see vis-a-vis America. They move to the right because, you know, suicide bombers were blowing up buses in the center of Israel. It's got to do with Israel and the neighborhood it lives in. For the most part, it's not I think one of the big problems.
But what I'm saying is that clearly they're seeing, I would think, if national security is their number one and they're moving to the right, then they're seeing that leftist policies aren't the answer for what they need. And that would go to what we're doing in our country, I'm saying, to protect and defend them.
Guy, you had your hand up. Do you see?
Well, I actually agree with much of what Ari said here. I don't think that they are doing anything differently. They're not reflecting on American policies. They're reflecting on what's happening in the region. There was the second intifada, which really destroyed the left in Israel that has yet to recover. And part of the problem, as I see it, is that Netanyahu's narrative goes unchallenged in Israel. And so they're really getting one narrative that is dominant that even the center-left opposition leaders are afraid to challenge. And I think that's a challenge for democracy, by the way. But with respect to American politics, I agree with Ari. I don't think that there is a big difference in terms of the positions that either party has. Most Israelis are not even attuned to the differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party on any issue, including foreign policy in Israel. And you won't hear a starkly different message from the various candidates that are running right now on the Republican or Democratic side when it comes to Israel.
I was interested at the beginning, and I'll just stop after this, but the reports that came out, I guess, that the president was potentially funding anti-Netanyahu campaigns in Israel, and I was there at the time, and that was really disturbing the region, the thought that we were playing into their politics, and you guys had led this panel saying that Bibi was interjecting in ours, which from the case that you've made, it does sound like he's really aligned himself with one party by inviting Romney and stuff, but I just think that might have to be going both ways. Right,
we've always played in Israeli politics. Israeli politics have ever. Let me backtrack. The Israelis have a great saying, one of the greatest sayings in the world. It's a little vulgar, so excuse me. Everyone pisses in the pool. Not everyone does it from the diving board. Okay, meaning everyone mucks around in some dirty stuff. You don't always do it on public display. So we always play in Israeli politics. Obama wasn't funding anti-Netanyahu things. Supporters of Obama who happen to be on the left, most of whom, by the way, are American Jews, were funding people who happen to have worked for Obama, which, by the way, is almost every serious person in the Democratic Party, to go work on the Israeli left. That's been going on forever. By the way, Republicans go work on the Israeli right. This is how political consultants make money. They do the same in England and all around the world. But of course, we always play in Israeli politics. Israeli always plays in our politics. But no one has done what Netanyahu did, which was go to a joint session of Congress and take down, or attempt to take down, a signature initiative of a sitting president against his wishes. You could applaud it and say good for him. You could think it's, as I do, one of the dumbest things that a leader of Israel has ever done. Forget that for a second. No one has ever done something like that. That is bold.
Can I just add? So, again, the difference with our government over others is that we have different branches, and the executive branch doesn't supersede our legislative branch. So Congress can invite Israel. Congress can invite Netanyahu to come and speak, and that's what happened. And
Congress can shut down the government, but it's not smart.
But they have the power to do that, right? Because they hold the power of the purse. But I think what can be shown in this light is during the Israeli elections, Netanyahu ran heavily on security. A lot of his TV ads was one of them that I found entertaining was him babysitting and going to the house and saying like, hey, do you want me or do you want his opponent? And that sticks. And I think for Israelis at that time, like you said, Guy, when tensions were really heightened from the Gaza war, that's what was needed, and that's what Israel citizens wanted, and that's what they voted in.
Yeah, there were predictions at one point, or maybe even some hopes in Washington that he looked like Netanyahu was in trouble. Of course, that didn't happen.
So he's got a smaller coalition than we had prior.
Right.
Please.
Yeah, just so like, the perfect deal was thrown around a few times tonight. Is a perfect deal, in your opinion, where Iran does not have a nuclear weapon? Is that the end? Like, say like, hey, this is a perfect deal. Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, or is that not the perfect deal?
That would be the perfect deal.
I think the criticisms of the deal, if I can interject real quickly, are the fact it doesn't last forever, right? There's 15-year timelines and some things, 20-year timelines. That some people had hoped at the start of negotiations that it would be rollback, basically would dismantle Iran's nuclear program and lift the sanctions, but instead Iran is going to be left with some nuclear infrastructure, which could theoretically break out at some future time. I'm not making the case here. I'm just saying what some of the criticisms are. Criticism about the decision to lift ballistic missile and other sanctions, conventional weapon sanctions unrelated to the nuclear thing, and then the sanctions relief. Most people would argue that sanctions relief is you're going to have to do, and the sanctions, as I already said, would fall apart anyway. So just with that.
I mean, look, the perfect deal would be Iran has no enrichment capability. Not only that, but they hold a free and fair election, and not only that, they give up support of terrorism and everything else they do around the world, which is destabilizing. Great, but none of that is realistic at this stage of point, right? Like, I mean, what's the perfect deal is, a moot point to some extent, which is the Iranians don't agree on that. And either if you're gonna have a deal, it's gonna be, by its nature, especially because it's negotiated, imperfect. Do I think the deal is the best deal we could have gotten? Personally, I would have loved to see Obama walk away at some point or have a tougher negotiator. Might have had an effect on the deal. Probably wouldn't have had a huge effect on the deal. The fundamental negotiation dynamics are, we weren't going to go to war, and the Iranians know it, and everyone else wants a deal. So you end up with what you end up with.
Well, so I'm just made the point. So like, if the perfect deal is like, hey, you don't have anything, suckers, and then like, so it's like this one's okay, nobody really likes it, but in 15 years, like, are we gonna like try to rework it to where they still don't get a bomb? Or, because I'm just saying, I think we're all in agreement that nobody despises Israel more than Iran, and so I mean, no one ever argues that. So I'm just saying, so like, if you're gonna act like you're a friend of Israel, it just seems like you would at least have, like you said, like President Obama has, obviously he's shown some disdain for, even before the deal was even being negotiated. Netanyahu and Obama are both at the UN. They don't even meet, whatever. It's not like, these are not friends. Like, they are, but they're not. They're best friends. They're gonna go play golf and smoke cigars. And so I'm just saying, so like, is the goal, like, in your mind, like, okay, because we're talking about, okay, we'll just delay it. Well, then when that delay like comes around 10 years, whatever, are we going to try to hope like a regime change happens, or we like rework it again to where we try to move it further back? That's kind of my, like, what's in your mind?
I mean, I would agree with you. I think the Middle East knows this too, but America has elections, and Obama's getting to the point where there's going to be another election, and we don't know if it's going to be a Democrat or Republican, and that can change everything that's being done right now. I think too, Obama in the beginning was talking about no path to a nuclear weapon for Iran during the negotiations, and as it got closer and closer, and as negotiations were delayed, messaging was tweaked and changed, and things were given up, and elements to the deal were allowed in, and we got what we got. But I don't think, it's my opinion that it's not perfect, like you said, and that it shouldn't have been allowed to get to this point. I think that you mentioned they could have walked away from the table, and they could have delayed what they were doing a little bit more. If you're already going to delay, this deal delays them. So why didn't you delay them more, or use negotiating tactics stronger in the case of negotiating with a state sponsor of terrorism, instead of just allowing something to come through quickly, because it doesn't help anyone.
Look, I mean, there's rhetoric and there's reality. The reality is, even in the best case scenario, we weren't going to get that much better of a deal than this. And I think I've been interacting with a lot of Republicans who I respect. Winston Churchill is a very well-respected figure. Jaw is better than war, is Winston Churchill saying. In 10 years or 15 years or 2 years, if they cheat, we can deal with it in 2 years. We're not at a weaker position. We're probably at a stronger position. And then we deal with it then. From your standpoint, maybe there'll be a Republican president. Maybe there'll be a Democratic president. Nothing in the deal prevents us from doing anything. I mean, with sanctions, there's a lot of things we have to do, but nothing in the deal takes away our ability to go to war if we need to go to war.
Well, Obama took that off the table as they were negotiating. So that right there, you're already negotiating
Barack
for a
Obama
week.
took that America will never go to war if it's in our
He said
interest.
that on multiple statements.
Name me a
that-
single place that he
that
said.
this deal is needed and we're not going to be going to war.
I don't, as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen, I mean, Obama's clearly said he doesn't want to go to war, but Barack Obama has said over and over, all options are on the table, as any American president would.
What I'd like to see happen, and so far I haven't seen it in public discourse, is seeing this as a fait accompli, as Ari and I both talked about. I know you disagree, Alexandria, and you think that there's still an opportunity to renegotiate the deal. We don't agree with that, right, Ari? I think at this point, what I would really like to see is the Israelis and the Americans and our Gulf allies discussing ways in which we can meet the new threats and the new challenges that are taking place in the Middle East. There's so much that can be done. The IDF just put out a report, basically including all the threats that Israel is facing, and they did not even mention the Iranian nuclear threat. They mentioned other immediate threats. They mentioned the the growing strength of the Islamist terror groups around the Middle East. It mentioned the civil war in Syria, which is becoming a failed state. And so what I'd like to see are discussions about what the United States can do in cooperation with its allies to increase and improve Israel's security in the wake of these threats, to improve the Gulf states' security in the wake of these threats. And so far, we haven't had that discussion.
And if I, sorry, in terms of the U.S. and Israel having discussions, a specific reason, because the United States has offered to Israel, let's talk about what we can do. And the Israeli response has been no, because if they accept that, then from the Israeli point of view, they would accept the fact that nuclear deal is going to go down. So basically saying we'll have that discussion should the nuclear deal be approved. But
Which I think
Israel doesn't want to have that.
Which I think is a mistake. I think they need to have that talk. They should have had that talk, and Netanyahu should not have rejected the offers made by Secretary of Defense who went to Israel recently and other administration officials who tried to provide Israel with compensation package that would really help Israel meet its strategic needs in the 21st century.
I think they will have that discussion. They're not going to have it until after September.
And to be clear, we're obligated by law to have that discussion. The U.S. has a law that Israel has to have a qualitative military edge versus its neighbors, or indeed a preponderance of its neighbors. But I think I agree with you totally. I think, and I think now we're just in political theater and endgame, which will, we could have political theater and endgame for a long time. But the reality is the deal will be passed some way or another. And then hopefully we'll have a productive adult conversation about what to do about it. I think the one thing that remains to be said, and I was saying that the U.S.-Israeli relationship is the worst it's ever been, which, by the way, I still stand by. It's not a bad relationship. It's still a pretty damn good relationship. So I don't want to overstate the case. I mean, the public opinion is good. The cooperation among professionals is good. There's a lot of tension. But change in leadership in both countries, sooner or later, it'll improve. But there are also very serious differences. There's going to be very serious differences on the peace process. There's going to be very serious differences, at least potentially very serious differences about a lot of the regional issues. There's a lot of complexity in all the regional issues. I mean, they're all over the map. There's a crisis in every country in the region, short of Morocco. So, there's going to be a kind of roller coaster ride. The whole region, and the U.S.-Israeli relationship is along with the ride.
That kind of leads perfectly into the last question that I want to ask our panelists, and please invite the audience to participate as well in this discussion. But there's two scenarios here. One, which at least two of the three panelists think is unlikely, is that the deal is killed. The other is that it will be approved. In each scenario, can you sketch out what that means for U.S.-Israeli relations? I can frankly see, from Netanyahu's point of view, one could see that either outcome is bad. I mean, if the deal is approved, he said he thinks it's a pathway to a bomb. If the deal is killed, he might in some sense be blamed for that. There might be some resentment, and at least if you believe Obama and Kerry, that's going to lead to a reduction in U.S. influence in the world, which can't be good for Israel. But starting with you, Alexandria, those scenarios, how does that affect U.S.-Israeli relations?
I think I just want to clarify, if the deal is killed, which, yes, it's very rare that will happen, but I'm an optimist, so I always say there's a chance for something. But if that does happen, who's to say we can't go to the drawing board? Who's to say that we can't tweak what we have, the executive agreement? All of those are options that are totally off the table right now. So I think
Iranians. Sorry, I don't mean that.
No, it's okay. But I mean, again, that's a negotiating thing. They're holding all the power. They're a win-win right now. They get this deal and they get money and the ability to have strength in their economy to increase. And then they don't get the deal and they still have the power to come back and say, okay, you didn't do this. This is what we want. But I think if the deal does go through, Guy, I think you mentioned this, where the U.S. really needs to look and project forward on how that is going to hurt Israel and their borders. We know we need to fund them. We have annual funds that go to them for security purposes, but 150 billion to Iran is very different from, I think, the 3 billion that the U.S. gives annually to Israel for their security measures. So I think that we would need to increase that, and obviously there's a lot of different scenarios to look at for it, but the U.S. needs to be involved in that relationship and be involved in protecting them. And that's the next step after we see what happens.
And you think U.S.-Israeli relations will sort of stumble along okay if the agreement is approved and you can have a new president a year and a half for this sort of deal?
I think like it's multifaceted. It's not based on one thing, and it's transcends party lines. It's transcend a lot of different administrations. And so I don't think this one thing is going to kill the relationship altogether. I think that the relationship of the U.S. and Israel stems to our people. And we have people that go to Israel, and we have shared values, and that's something that can't be easily broken. I know when I went to Israel last September and had the opportunity to go up to the Temple Mount, I felt like, many Jews feel when they go up there and try and just see a holy site, oppressed and watched. And as an American, being told that you can't pray, or you can't look like you're praying, or to have a Palestinian guard look at you when you have a dress on that's completely covering every part of your body, and them to say it's not enough, put more on, and just being extremely scrutinizing of everything. They want to make you feel uncomfortable.
And
they want to make
money up there too.
right, but they want to make it right. They give you these little. They're like a square. It's like, what am I supposed to do with that? But they want to make non-Muslims feel uncomfortable. And I know that there was a delegation of congressmen that went just earlier this month, and they were just targeted. And you can definitely tell from just officials walking over and scrutinizing what one of the congressman's wives was wearing. Again, she was completely covered and just a little bit of her skin was shown. And they just want to make you feel uncomfortable. And that just goes to show where their ideology is and where they're projecting things to go. Where in Israel, you have the freedom to walk to a synagogue, to walk to a church, to walk to a temple of any sort, and you can do that freely. And under them, you can't.
Can I two scenarios, or maybe there's a third scenario?
Well, so first of all, it's been said here before, but I didn't say it in my opening statement, so I might as well say it now, which is that the U.S.-Israel relationship is based on solid foundations, it's based on shared values and shared interests, and I think that it will remain strong in the years ahead. Now, having said that, I think that as long as Netanyahu remains in power, it's going to be a problem. And the problem didn't start with Obama, it started with Netanyahu when he was prime minister during his first term from 96 to 99. And he also undermined President Bill Clinton as well. He came here, and before he went to the White House, he had a meeting at the Mayflower Hotel in order, with Jerry Falwell and the leaders of the Christian right and Republican allies to undermine the president. And Clinton reprimanded him accordingly. So there was some tension back then as well. But more importantly, regardless of whether we stand, whether you're in favor of the Iran deal or against the Iran deal, the fact that the United States is now dealing with the Iranians provides an opportunity, because by engaging them, we have leverage over them that we never had before, that we haven't had in many years, decades. And I think that this could be seen as an opportunity to make some changes in Iran. And I don't just mean changes domestically, I mean changes in Iran's foreign policy, which are very important to the Gulf, to our Gulf allies, and of course to Israel and to our own interests in the Middle East. And so I'd like to see relentless pressure by the Obama administration and whoever his successor happens to be on the Iranians to change course in the Middle East. Also, I think that the United States can improve Israel's security needs by providing the F-35 Joint Striker jets. These are very sophisticated stealth fighters that are also very expensive, and there's been a lot of talk. Biden recently talked about providing Israel with some of these highly sought planes. I think that's something that could be in the cards. There's been talk about improving the Israel's Arrow missile defense system. I think that's something that could be done. The bunker busting, the bunker busting ordinance is very controversial.
Ordnance penetrator.
Yes, that's the technical name for it. That I don't see the United States providing that to Israel, but it could be something that the Israelis ask for at least in negotiations, and perhaps also an extended security guarantee to Israel that the United States can provide, just as we do to Japan and South Korea, NATO, and other countries in the event that another country uses a nuclear weapon against Israel.
Ari, you've been pretty clear that you think Netanyahu's misplayed this. How do you see?
Oh, badly. Yeah.
How do you see U.S.-Israeli relations under either scenario?
Look, I think there's the world I'd like to see and the world that I see. So from my perspective, don't confuse it. The world as I see it is that U.S.-Israeli relations do have a very strong foundation, but they are weakening, and they will continue to weaken. They are weakening fundamentally because the two peoples are, to significant degrees, I don't want to overstate it, but moving apart on fundamental issues around which the relationship is moving. So, for instance, you talked about going to Temple Mount and, the importance of Judeo-Christian values and praying openly. That is, first of all, by the way, I agree, all those things are very important. That's fundamentally the language of the right in America and the right in Israel. The left in America and the left in Israel, no one's anti, the free practice of religion, but that's fundamentally something that doesn't resonate nearly as well on the left in either country. And it doesn't resonate, you could say the same thing about the use of force. The fundamentals are strong, but they are, I think, weakening on a public level. The leadership has, on the top, particularly on the Israeli side, I'd say to some degree on the American side, but particularly on the Israeli side, because I think they fundamentally misread that reality, has exacerbated that. But that's probably not going to change unless the underlying dynamic that Israel exists in, which may not be able to be changed, which has got to do with the peace process and got to do with fundamental conflict and the fundamental conflicts within the Middle East change. That's not an attempt to say what I like or what I don't like. That's an attempt to describe what I think is going on. In terms of, and by the way, I think that's a long-term process that may move. It's like a glacier, probably glide along very smoothly, but there may be a point where there's a big break. I don't think the big break will be all that big, but there may be a point where something happens and there's just a shift. And I think that's a serious worry. And if I was an Israeli, I'd be very worried about that. And I don't think the leaders of Israel are very worried about that, in part because I don't think they understand the American body politic very well, sadly. In terms of the deal, look, I don't know what the scenario looks like if the deal doesn't go through. If I tried to prognosticate it, I don't think it's going to happen. But if the deal doesn't go through, I think there'll be an attempt to return to the negotiating table. It may work. Maybe we could get a better deal, but I think in all likelihood, the negotiations will just break down. The Iranians will refuse to negotiate. The East Asians will use this as an excuse to trade. The Europeans will use this as an excuse to bash the Americans, and they'll all be right to do it, by the way, because we'll look feckless and weak on the international stage, and we'll be a laughingstock, largely because our Congress is our Congress. If it passes, I think there's two scenarios. One is, basically, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to roughly get on board, and the relationship will mutter along until Obama leaves office, and then whoever comes in will attempt to have a much stronger relationship with Israel because it's important. It could improve markedly, but I still think the fundamental dynamics are off for Israel, and they don't look good.
Elise, you're our master timekeeper. Are we doing okay on
I think
time?
we are good for time right now.
Okay. Do you have other questions from the audience, or please?
Yeah, I was just gonna add one very important aspect of this deal is that U.S. is not only a deal between the U.S. and Iran. It's a deal that involves a lot of countries, and some of them are members to Security Council, and some of them are even friends to Israel and United States, right? So my question would be, is it possible for the deal not to go through, even if the Congress is not accepting it, since we have other powers, other superpowers in the world that are signatories to that deal?
I'm not a scholar of international law, but I don't think the deal can go through unless it's affirmed by all sides and affirmed by the UN Security Council, and we couldn't do that if the deal didn't pass through Congress.
Regardless, though, the sanctions regime will be dead. The European companies and Chinese companies and Russian companies are going to be doing business in Iran, and for all intents and purposes, the multilateral sanctions that the administration has spent years putting together are going to be gone without any commitment on the Iranian side. So I think it's I think that scenario is a very dangerous scenario.
And my understanding also, in talking to people from the Obama administration itself and experts on the outside who have worked on sanctions, the actual resolution of disapproval, should it be sustained, would prevent Obama from basically using unilateral powers to lift the sanctions. He could not do this. Sometimes in recent history, Obama has done things by executive power that maybe Congress has disagreed with. In this case, he couldn't just say, I'm going to honor the deal, I'm going to lift these sanctions in return for Iran's doing what it was supposed to do, to be blocked from doing that. So yeah, I think if the U.S. doesn't step up, then the deal is pretty much, if not dead, mortally wounded. Okay, since I like to be a provocateur, I'm going to introduce one last provocative issue into the discussion, the issue that dare not speak its name. My colleague Jonathan Landay of McClatchy wrote a newspaper article today questioning why the issue of Israel's nuclear arsenal is not part of the discussion. Israel's never admitted it, but it's a known fact that Israel has like 80 to 100 or so nuclear warheads. So my question to the panelists, again, I'm being deliberately provocative here, should that be part of the discussion, or should it not be part of the discussion because it complicates things, because everybody knows that Israel only has that arsenal as a last resort to ensure survival? The sanction option has been called. Guy,
I don't think it should be part of the discussion for a very simple reason. Israel has a policy of nuclear ambiguity. It's never stated whether it has or does not have nuclear weapons. The possibility that it does is a key factor in Arab leaders' decision over the years to come to terms with Israel's existence. I think if it were not for Israel's bomb in the basement, so to speak, or the possibility that Israel has a bomb in the basement, Sadat would not have made peace with Israel. Jordan would not have made peace with Israel. The Palestinians would not have changed course in the early 90s. So I think that it's very important to differentiate a nation that has a bomb or that may have a bomb, and I think Israel does. I think it has more than a couple, who doesn't acknowledge that it has it, never threatens any other country with it, vis-a-vis a nation that, or a regime, I should say, not a nation, but a regime that has repeatedly threatened to destroy the Jewish state. By the way, I don't think that Iran would actually use nuclear weapons to destroy Israel. I think that there are better arguments against doing that than for doing that. I don't really think that's the issue here. But nevertheless, there's a big difference here, and it seems much more threatening, not just to Israel, but to its neighbors in the Gulf and to other Arab countries in the Middle East, aside from the Gulf countries, including Egypt. Moreover, if Israel is pressured to either relinquish its nuclear weapons, which it's not going to do, or to include the Israeli nuclear arsenal in the discussion, this also undermines the foundations of the U.S. non-proliferation regime, because it really would force the United States to confront Israel on this issue. It would also force Arab leaders, who up until now have been very hesitant to pursue the nuclear option. It would put pressure on them to do the same. It would really undermine the entire nuclear, non-proliferation regime. So, for those reasons, I think it would be a bad idea.
Alexandria, apples and oranges, or?
No, I would agree it shouldn't be part of the discussion. Israel hasn't threatened anyone with a nuclear weapon, unlike Iran. And the reason why Iran has sanctions like it does, and Israel doesn't, is three-pronged. So Iran has human rights violations. They have their missiles that they're working on, and then the state sponsor of terrorism. So all three of those together make for a dangerous country, and Israel does not fit under any of those categories.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of Israel, but of course Israel has human rights violations. I mean,
not the way.
I'm not saying it's
I
the
mean,
same as
every
the Iranian
country-
regime.
Every country does.
The
But
world is not black and white. Look, I think it's apples and oranges, and certainly from an American and an Israeli perspective, you want it to be apples and oranges. From an Iranian perspective and an Egyptian perspective, you want it on the table. I think realistically, no one's going to deal with the Israelis. The Israelis aren't part of the NPT is the legal reason why it's not an international issue, because they're not signatories to the main international treaty. I think they're one of 3 countries, or maybe 4 countries who aren't signatories to the NPT, so it looks bad ultimately. But you know, realistically, no one is dealing with that issue unless there's a full peace, and even then, it's hesitant. All that said, you know, there's scenarios in which people are forced to deal with that issue. Imagine a scenario where Iran gets a nuclear bomb, which is a very bad scenario. I'm not worried about. I mean, you can never totally discount that the Iranians are going to wake up one day and say, "Hey, we want to nuke the Israelis." It's highly, highly unlikely. You can never underestimate the possibility of a Dr. Strangelove where some Iranian commander wakes up and says, "Hey, I want to nuke the Israelis." I think much more likely is you have an accidental war between Israel and Iran. They both fire, you know, flight time missile-wise between them is like 8 minutes. We almost fought accidental wars with the Soviet Union multiple times. There's no red line. They're already in low intensity conflict with each other. They don't talk. That's a bad scenario, and very, very dangerous. So I think if they were to get a bomb, it would just become naturally part of the conversation because experts would start wondering about things like how do they communicate, or what happens in a crisis, or what's the role of the United States. So, you know, it may be dragged onto the international stage by events, but I think for the time being, it's certainly not to the Israelis' benefit or the Americans for that matter, and you know, not in our benefit to discuss the Israeli bomb, but for the Iranian perspective, I mean, sure, they don't want the Israelis to have a bomb, or the Egyptians, or most of the Arab, you know.
I would just add one more thing. I would just to make a provocative statement here. I would argue that what's more dangerous than the Israeli bomb or even the Iranian bomb is the demographic time bomb in the West Bank and East Jerusalem that threatens to undermine the foundations of the Zionist idea of having a Jewish state. And for this reason, we haven't really talked about this. I think it's imperative that the United States take a leadership role in resuming peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. This is the last thing Netanyahu wants to hear, and I don't know whether President Abbas is on board, but it's absolutely essential to the future of Israel and to stability in the region, at least that part of the region.
Having watched Secretary of State Kerry closely and traveled with him a little bit, I know that he is going to be just as active post-nuclear deal as he was before. He'll find something. I don't know if he's going to try and make peace in Syria or make peace between the Israelis and Palestinians or between the Koreas, but he's like an energizer bunny. Whatever you think of him.
I hope he does something with ISIS.
Yeah, ISIS.
I have one.
Please.
Can we talk about the fact the United Nations deemed Israel the #1 offender of women's rights? Deemed them the biggest offender against women?
The UN doesn't like Israel. No, the UN is probably the UN Human Rights Commission. Yeah. So I mean, I think I speak to the panelists when I say we don't agree with that, but you know that's what the UN Human Rights Council does.
Okay, but that's the same council that we're following their lead on this, and they've allowed Iran to have their own inspectors in their own country, which I don't know if counts as inspection anymore. I'm just wondering how much that affects the national discussion, the global discussion about where Israel is nowhere to be heard in this. The real threat to Israel is not discussed. And it really concerns me that like the whole thing here is whether Israel's in jeopardy. And the provocative thing, the most provocative thing I've heard is that some people here don't think Iran would use force against Israel when they declared that they will. So we're talking about rhetoric versus reality. That's the reality they face.
You know, I'm going to let Ari answer, but my understanding of, and this is straight from senior Israeli security officials, their concern about Iran having a nuclear bomb is not that Iran is just going to wake up one morning and launch nuclear weapons in Tel Aviv or you name the city, Nazareth. Their concern is that if Iran got a nuclear bomb, they would then be able to do more aggressive actions, destabilize Arab neighbors, act against Israel, and they'll have this umbrella where it'll be much more hard to push back against those things. And I'd be glad for my colleagues to disagree with that, but that's my understanding. That's a serious concern, but it's different from
Plus nuclear proliferation.
plus nuclear proliferation studies would follow.
Right, but I'm saying it was still said tonight that we don't.
No one who's serious in the security community in either country disagrees with that. By the way, I mean I know. Tell me if you disagree with that, but the reality is, sorry, I kept using the phrase rhetoric versus reality. This is one problem that Netanyahu got, isn't. Iran is a bad country. Iran is not Nazi Germany. Okay, the Iranian leadership is a terrible leadership. They're not Adolf Hitler. You know, the odds. I think almost every security. You can never totally discount it, but you know, what Iran says is, by the way, isn't necessarily what it do, and what it said that the guy who stormed out is a little more complicated than we're making it out to be. Not much, but a little. And I think the reality is, anyone who's there's public rhetoric of like, Iran is evil and they're going to threaten us and we're going to have to lobby Congress. But the reality is, Iran probably ain't going to launch a nuclear weapon if they get one. And I agree with him, by the way. It's unclear that they made a choice to get one. They want to, at minimum, keep the option of getting one. But it's not that controversial of a position. No one is really all that worried about it. It's something you can never totally discount. It's a serious, serious problem. And by the way, if I was Israeli, I'd be super worried about it because it's a real thing.
Yeah,
but that's not
them.
Israel's.
It's their number one concern. That's their number one.
Yeah, but most Americans were worried about getting Ebola last summer. Like, there's like what people who know something about the issue and people. I say it's not. I mean, I'm not an expert on law stuff. There's, of course it's a concern. If I was Israeli, I go to Israel all the time, right? I'd be worried about that. From the Jewish experience, you have the Holocaust. From the Israeli experience, you have the experience of being surprised in the '73 war. Nevertheless, I think any Israeli security analyst would go, the odds of that happening are extremely low, and that's not what they're worried about, and that's not controversial.
I agree, and it's not that the Iranian regime is not Nazi Germany. They may or may not be. I don't know. It's that Israel is not Czechoslovakia. So Israel would destroy Iran, or at least a good chunk of Iran, or has the means to do so if Iran tried to, were to use nuclear weapons. So it's not going to happen for that reason alone. There's deterrence that didn't exist back in Munich, which is why the Munich analogy is so ridiculous. It's overused and it's completely not apt to this and so many other situations. But more importantly, the Israeli analysts, the military and security analysts that Ari just talked about, are united in that Iran is not the number one threat that is facing Israel today. Some of Iran's proxies are. Iran is relevant here to the discussion. Iran, by the way, also has undermined the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks over the years. Iran was responsible for, at least in part, for getting Netanyahu in power in 1996 because they funded Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which perpetuated back-to-back suicide bombings throughout the 1996 election campaign. And Shimon Peres found his numbers dropping precipitously, and Netanyahu barely won that election by 0.1% because of Iranian influence in that election. So the Iranians have a terrible track record in terms of what they're doing in the Middle East and what they've been doing for the last 20 years, but they are not the number one security threat that Israel faces.
So just to wrap it up, so if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, they're not afraid to use it. I agree, whether they use it right away, or I think their intention is to produce slow and kind of like slow cooking, where they make Israel feel uncomfortable and they make Israel citizens feel uncomfortable, and that's how they're trying to like infiltrate. But I think it is known that if they did have the option of a nuclear weapon, that does make them more dangerous, and that they aren't afraid to use it, even if it's just a little bit of a percent. But their objective is to destroy Israel. So I think that that's something that we can't overlook, no matter if they're going to use it right away or if they're going to wait and try other tactics first. It just makes Iran more dangerous, and that's not helpful to anyone in the Middle East, especially Israel.
And I have to disagree with that. Sorry, I don't think that's their objective. I think their objective is to have much more regional influence, and that's always been their objective.
One of the objectives, I would agree.
The Ayatollah doesn't wake up every day thinking about Israel. The Ayatollah wants you, and Netanyahu wants you to think that the Ayatollah wakes up thinking about Israel. The Ayatollah wakes up every day thinking about, how do I stay in power? How do I get this little slice of Iraq if I could? What's the price of oil? When is the Messiah going to come back? He doesn't like Israel. Don't get me wrong. I think him having a nuclear weapon is a really bad deal, but I don't think he's like frothing at the mouth to fire a weapon and destroy his country either.
I don't think it's the objective for Iran, nor do I think it's an objective.
Yeah.
We're sort of coming up on an hour and 45 minutes here. Are there any last questions from the audience, or any last points the panel wants to make? We've covered a lot of ground.
I have a question.
Okay. We'll make this the last one.
Okay. Well, for one, if someone says I'm going to kill you, you need to believe them. Number one. Secondly, what if we were dealing with any other country that's not Iran? What would be the criteria for a country deserving a nuclear weapon?
So look, people aren't countries, right? Of course, if the country threatens you, you need to pay attention, but it doesn't, just because I say I'm gonna, I could wake up and say as the United States we're gonna do X, doesn't mean you're gonna do it, right? You have to evaluate what they say and their intentions. That's an important thing. You have to evaluate their capabilities. You have to evaluate, your ability to deter them, or to, it's a very complicated equation that isn't just like, by the way, I don't think people are that simple, but isn't just like a personal debate. It's a serious issue that's got to be seriously looked at. In terms of general, there's a global, United States was the first country to get a nuclear weapon. The world didn't know what to do about it. The Russians got a nuclear weapon eventually. The British, the French got a nuclear weapon. We came up with a global treaty called the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The fundamental notion of which is a bit of a fiction, is that the countries who don't have a nuclear weapon will not seek to acquire a nuclear weapon, though they'll be given the right of access to nuclear energy and nuclear medicine and things, civilian use. And the nuclear powers will move slowly towards, or will eventually get rid of their nuclear weapons. So we've gotten rid of a bunch of our nuclear weapons, and the Soviets have, well, not the Russians. And the other countries are not supposed to get nuclear weapons, and various countries have given up nuclear programs, and various countries have violated that. There's no you deserve a nuclear weapon. It's not a concept in international law or in international relations, and frankly, the less countries with them, the better. There is what you're legally obligated to have, and I mean, it's a kind of complicated thing, but no one wants nuclear proliferation anywhere, and then of course you don't want it in countries that are more unstable or more hostile. So if Canada got a nuclear weapon, no one would be thrilled about it, but it's not, we wouldn't really be all that worried about it, because the Canadians have no reason for it. So, and to be fair to the Iranians, if I'm Iran, Afghanistan was invaded, Iraq was invaded, they weren't, North Koreans have a nuclear bomb, they weren't. So, people also, they have a reason for wanting them that's defensive too.
Last comments, Alexandria?
I mean, I agree with Ari. I would say that if you want to look at a dangerous nuclear weapon state, it's Pakistan, because it's a weak state, and it's in a very volatile area, and you have hostilities between India and Pakistan, two nuclear states that are facing each other, that are fighting over a piece of territory, Kashmir, for many years, and I think that could spill over into something dangerous. I don't think that any country that does not have nuclear weapons today should be getting nuclear weapons, and I think that that's part of that non-proliferation regime that Ari was alluding to. And the idea that President Obama has, of course, that he expressed in his Prague speech in 2009, was to have a world without any nuclear weapons, which I don't know any serious analyst who believes that will ever happen, because it's a technology that exists. But we should certainly strive towards reducing the number of weapons that nuclear weapon states have, and to prevent states from who don't have nuclear weapons from acquiring them.
And I think your last comment, keep countries that don't have nuclear weapons from obtaining them, just as the whole premise to this conversation. That's what Iran's doing. That's what they're trying to evolve into, and that's what the international community is trying to stop.
Great. Well, this has been a really fabulous discussion. I want to thank everybody for keeping my rule of keeping it civil, even though it got spirited. And we've covered a lot of ground. We could sit here and talk all night, but I really want to thank our excellent panelists for joining us.